Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast. This week with just your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire. But we are joined right now with a play-by-play announcing legend, and very glad to have him as part of the show. And that is John Watanabe. And
Woo! Yay!
yes,
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 straight up John Watanabe coming straight up at you. And right now, I'm in a very thankful mood. I thank God for everything. I thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for his free gift of salvation in him. And I'm thankful to JP Zarka, who recommended that I come on your show here. I'm also thankful to the Garden Grove Strawberry Festival Association for inviting me to be one of the celebrities for a certain event coming up on May 24th that I'll talk about later on in this program. And to you, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, manager extraordinaire, you and I should both be thankful because this year you and I are both celebrating our 25th year anniversary debuts in wrestling. Congratulations to you on your 25th year debut as a wrestling manager for APW in Northern California. And I'm thankful that I'm celebrating this year my 25th year debut for two, yes, not one, but two nationally seen wrestling promotions, Tokyo Pop's English language FMW Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, which was a top seller on Billboard Sports Video Chart, and seen on the Fight Network throughout Canada and the United Kingdom for 10 years, and also for the syndicated Urban Wrestling Alliance TV shows that was syndicated in 20 major markets across the United States on UPN TV stations. And I know that you and I have lots of mutual friends who worked on the UWA Urban Wrestling Alliance. I look forward to talking about it all on Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast.
Now, where are you coming out from? That's quite an intro, by the way. I could just go by myself and go get a sandwich and come back and let you just handle everything. But where are you coming out of right now?
Yes, I'm coming from Southern California to you in Northern California. So I'm thankful that we have this California connection going on here. And I'm originally from the Midwest. And I should mention that there are two types of announcing and wrestling that I've done in different stages of my life. But maybe I should go backtrack even further because I've watched other interview shows of yours where you say, take us back to the very beginning on how you got interested in wrestling in the first place before I actually earned money in professional wrestling.
You're doing my job for me, so go right ahead.
There you go. One step ahead. Never mind. Anyway. Okay, so I was born and raised in small towns in Illinois, and I graduated from Columbia College Chicago, where I studied broadcasting there. And the good thing about our childhood years, we both grew up during the regional wrestling territory years, you know, where there are different styles, different TV presentations of wrestling in different parts of the country, you in Northern California, me in the Midwest, before a certain corporate giant took over much of the world with their one template or one brand of sports entertainment.
Were you guys in AWA territory?
Well, I grew up, there were actually three regional territories that I grew up watching. One of them never promoted in the Midwest, but two of them did. I'll start off with the third one first. Through TV, through the Spanish International Network, I actually caught the Spanish feed of the NWA Los Angeles Wrestling Territory from the Grand Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles, which I later wound up doing play-by-play in, which I'm thankful for. And of course, there were a lot of Hispanic wrestlers on that promotions, including, you know, Black Gordman and Goliath, also Hector and Chavo and Mondo Guerrero. And by the way, Mondo Guerrero, years later, you know, I watched him when I was a little kid, but years later, Mondo Guerrero became a good personal friend of mine and my wife April's, because I first knew Mondo Guerrero through my pastor brother-in-law's church. Many years ago, Mondo Guerrero and his wife Barb led a youth group at Grace Harbor Church and School in Tustin, California, which is led by my pastor brother-in-law Fred Snyder and my worship leader sister-in-law Dawn Snyder. And it's so funny, back then on the Los Angeles territory, I also saw this young skinny kid with a kilt named Roddy Piper. And a lot of the stuff he did back then, he wound up doing in the WWF many years later. And it's so funny, in more recent years at church, Mondo and I would talk about wrestling. And when Roddy Piper passed away, Mondo Guerrero said, yeah, Roddy Piper, he was a good friend of mine and my brothers. And boy, that's really breaking kayfabe, because back in those days, those guys were enemies on LATV. So that's really neat to hear. And also, I grew up watching two regional promotions in the Midwest, and both promoted in the Chicago area and other parts of Illinois. One was Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Association, based out of Minnesota, and the other one was Dick the Bruiser's World Wrestling Association, based out of Indiana. And they both promoted together, they co-promoted monthly at the International Amphitheater on the south side of Chicago, next to the stockyards. And back in those days, the International Amphitheater, they had livestock shows with horses and cattle, and the amphitheater also attracted other kinds of animals, crazy wrestling fans. And again, Bruiser and Gagne promoted monthly shows together, which was great. It was like watching a Super Bowl of wrestling every month, the best of the AWA versus the best of the WWA. And Bruiser's and Gagne's frontman, or the promoter in Chicago, was Bob Luce, who I'm thankful I got to know during the twilight of his promoting career. I helped him to promote some local shows when I worked in radio, ticket giveaways, wrestler interviews. But Bob Luce was very innovative, way ahead of his time. Some of the things that the World Wrestling Federation did years later, Bob Luce was doing on a lower budget. Like, for example, he would play ring entrance music at the amphitheater for all the wrestlers coming in. That was way ahead of its time. Also, you may remember Vince McMahon's TNT talk show, where he would interview wrestlers and do skits and demonstrations.
Tuesday Night Titans.
And have angles. Well, Bob Luce did that many years before on Bob Luce Wrestling on Channel 44 WSNS in Chicago. And a good friend of mine, Pastor John Davis in Noblesville, Indiana, he wrestled during the 1970s. He was also a manager named Handsome Johnny Starr, and Handsome Johnny Starr worked for Bob Luce. Handsome Johnny Starr, by the way, managed heels back then, like Ox Baker and Chuck the Monster O'Connor, who later became Big John Studd, and the Strangler, who later became Gentleman Jerry Valiant. And Handsome Johnny Starr said in recent years, if Bob Luce had the budget or the money that the World Wrestling Federation had, the World Wrestling Federation would not exist today, because Luce would have done all those ideas before the WWF did. And back when I was a child, I used to watch, not only TV wrestling, but I attended shows that promoted in our area, including the International Amphitheater cards. And back then, ringside seats for only $10, unheard of nowadays. And I thought I'd share an International Amphitheater memory of yours and how it relates to independent wrestling today. I'm on LinkedIn, and one of my LinkedIn connections is an independent wrestling promoter out of Wisconsin named Justin Clapper. And Justin Clapper always gives good advice when it comes to promoting independent wrestling today. And I reacted to one of his comments with an amphitheater memory when Justin Clapper said that a lean, high-quality card of only 4 or 5 standout matches will usually get the crowds wanting more and wanting more the next time at your next event. And I agreed with him. And I said to him, it reminds me of an old International Amphitheater event that I was at many years ago. It was billed as a tag team spectacular, combining AWA and WWA talent from Gagne's group and Bruiser's group. And there were only 5 matches on the card, only 5 matches, but each match meant something. Each of those tag team matches had a reason for me wanting to go and see it, thanks to the localized TV interviews from the wrestlers and the announcers back then. And the main event on this excellent tag team spectacular event at the amphitheater was a great match. The AWA World Tag Team Champions, Greg Gagne and Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, the High Flyers, successfully defending their titles against your Northern California legends, Patterson and Stevens. So what memories, what memories.
Yes. So after watching a lot of wrestling, as a kid, how did you get involved originally with your first wrestling federation?
Sure. Well, okay. Well, I should really, before I give you a lot more details, I should really give you a basic overview, because there's a basic overview because there were 2 types of wrestling announcing I did in different phases of my life. First, I did some local ring announcing and local house shows. And how I got into that. I was working at a radio station one time, and I should mention that when I worked at different radio stations, I connected with anybody who was promoting wrestling to do ticket giveaways or wrestler interviews, whether it was the AWA or the NWA or small independent wrestling groups, whoever happened to be promoting wrestling in my area, wherever my radio station was at. But anyway, how I got into ring announcing, I was working at the time at a small, now defunct radio station called WFXW, AM 1480 in Geneva, Illinois. And I got this job shortly after I graduated from Columbia College, Chicago. And one time I called Gary Juster. He was the promoter at the time for the Midwest and the Northeast for house shows in those areas for the National Wrestling Alliance, which was the group then seen on Ted Turner's Superstation TBS. And I just simply wanted to interview wrestlers for my radio work. And then out of the blue, Gary Juster asked me, "Have you done any ring announcing?" And I said, "No." And then Gary Juster said, "But you've seen it thousands of times." And I go, "Oh, yeah." So he wanted me to do ring announcing for his events at the Hammond Civic Center in Hammond, Indiana, which was really a part of the Chicago metro area. It's in Northwest Indiana. So I did that. And the first time I did ring announcing at the Hammond Civic Center, the referee that night was Drew Tossell, who was a preliminary wrestler for Vern Gagne's AWA. He also did other things like drive the ring truck and set up the wrestling ring. And he was a very nice and friendly guy. And after I did some ring announcing that night, Drew Tossell said to me, "Hey, Mr. Announcer, you're doing a good job, Mr. Announcer." And he was impressed. And that gave me confidence that I had what it took to be a part of this wrestling business. And my biggest memory of doing ring announcing at the Hammond Civic Center, I actually have a couple of good memories. A shout out to my good longtime friend, Sonny Rogers. I still keep in touch with him today. He's a longtime wrestler, promoter, trainer. But I remember introducing him and his partner, Johnny Stewart, the illustrious Johnny Stewart, versus the Sheep Herders, aka the Bushwhackers. And because I know Sonny, it was a good time introducing my friend in the ring. Also, there was a well-documented incident at the Hammond Civic Center where I was there. It was written about in Road Warrior Animal's book, where Road Warrior Animal got an eye injury. I was there when it happened at the Hammond Civic Center. I remember that night it was the Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk, accompanied by Paul Ellering, versus Paul Jones's Army, the Warlord, and Ivan Koloff, the Russian Bear, and Paul Jones was there. And I knew, and this is funny, while I was doing some announcing and, when I was introducing the wrestlers, I was wearing a tuxedo. Road Warrior Animal came up to me in the back and he started touching my tuxedo. It was just kind of weird. And maybe, boy, it says in the Bible, you reap what you sow. Well, later on after the match, he had to go to the dressing room because he got an eye injury. And it was kind of weird because the Road Warriors, they didn't do their usual spectacular finish like the Doomsday Advice or anything like that. The finish just came out of nowhere, where Road Warrior Animal just gave Ivan Koloff a clothesline out of nowhere, and then they quickly went to the pin, 1, 2, 3. They went home right away. And then I recall the Road Warriors and Paul Ellering, they immediately got out of the ring, went back to the dressing room. And Paul Jones and his Army, we did, like, I guess you can say, stalling to keep the audience's attention away from what was really going on with Animal and his eye injury, where I was about to announce the winners, and then Paul Jones and his Army raised their hands. Everybody booed like crazy. And then I said, "And your winners, the Legion of Doom, Animal and Hawk, the Road Warriors." And then everybody cheered. And then Ivan Koloff, he came at me and he started yelling and screaming at me, "You dummy, you stupid, you son of a," the whole bit. And I was cowering in the corner. But in reality, Ivan Koloff, he was such a sweet man, a really good gentleman.
That's what everyone says about him.
Yeah, exactly. He really stayed in character, but really behind the scenes, he was a good man, and also he was a good born-again Christian. He was outspoken about his Christian faith. So some memories of my ring announcing days there at the Hammond Civic Center. And how I got into play-by-play announcing, well, it wasn't until many years later, before, during, and after I did ring announcing in the Chicago area. I also worked consistently in radio, on the air, different radio stations. Also, I did acting, professional stage acting, and on-camera TV acting, TV commercials and corporate videos. And then I eventually moved to California, to Southern California, because there are really lots more opportunities for all that kind of work out here. I mean, Illinois was a fine wading pool. It was a good start to get your feet wet, but then after a while, you just have to move out west to get more opportunities. And thank God I did, including the 2 nationally seen professional wrestling play-by-play announcing gigs I got.
Probably your first winter in California. You were pretty darn glad you moved out to California rather than living in Chicago. Because I've been to Chicago a number of times, and I wore everything that I could wear, like to a ski trip, and I was freezing. And they said, "Oh," and this was in November. They're like, "Oh, it hasn't even gotten cold yet," you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, now I'm sure living in Southern California has been a big cultural change from life in the Midwest.
Yeah, difference in weather. Yeah, out here in California, as you know, they don't really have weather. They have climate. It pretty much stays the same throughout the whole year. So yeah, the weather out here is good in Southern California, and also more opportunities, like I said. And I auditioned for both of these nationally seen professional wrestling host and play-by-play jobs. The Tokyo Pop FMW wrestling, Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, I got that through an ad in Backstage West. Backstage West is a trade publication for people seeking work in stage or on camera, movies, that kind of thing. And they actually had an ad in Backstage West for Tokyo Pop's FMW wrestling. They needed an announcer. And for the Urban Wrestling Alliance TV shows a little bit later, I got that through my then theatrical talent agent, John McCormick from the Morgan Agency. They had an office in Hollywood near all the touristy sites. And the Urban Wrestling Alliance, it fell under the umbrella of theatrical. I also had a commercial agent too, that got me TV commercials, and I had this theatrical agent, and which he got through the actor breakdowns of auditions going all over the place. And he called me, and I got the audition for the Urban Wrestling Alliance. So I guess I should start with Tokyo Pop's FMW.
Tell me about what it was like going to Japan and working for a federation out there.
Well, actually, I never had to go to Japan for it, but they came to us on the West Coast. Yeah, we're the FMW promoter, Arai's son, Mr. Arai. He would come over sometimes with the FMW wrestlers like Fuyuki and Hayabusa, the flying assassin, great, innovative, high-flying wrestler who I think influenced a lot of wrestlers today with his high-flying stuff. And yeah, they would come to the Tokyo Pop office on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. And also I saw them at the E3 convention, where I was asked to be the host for Tokyo Pop and FMW wrestling at the E3 convention at the convention center in downtown Los Angeles, where they actually had a ring set up. And also ECW was there too. I remember when I got there, Tommy Dreamer told me that they were promoting their ECW video game. And he asked me, are you promoting a video game? No, I'm here to promote the brand new upcoming FMW wrestling videos in English language from Japan. Also, I was there as their hype man to hype up Tokyo Pop in general, their manga, their anime, their books that they sold in bookstores. So I did that. And the audition for FMW, it took place at the Tokyo Pop headquarters on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. And I was asked to do straight play-by-play for a Japanese wrestling match, which I did. And I know that they saw a lot of people. And one of the people who auditioned for my part, this is a funny story. I've told this before. I'll tell it again. I could see actor headshots, 8x10 headshots on the floor there in the audition room. And this was confirmed to me later on. One of the people who auditioned for my FMW announcer role was the Hollywood actor known as Tiny Lister, a.k.a. Zeus. He wrestled as Zeus for a while against Hulk Hogan and the
World. He died a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and yes, and he had lots of acting credits, of course, and I know that he auditioned for it. And I always tell people, and this was confirmed to me too. One of our Tokyo Pop production assistants, Daisuke Kanoche, he confirmed to me and Dan Lavransky, who was my second color commentator for FMW. Daisuke confirmed to me that yes, Tiny Lister did indeed audition for my FMW announcer gig that I got, and Dan Lavransky laughed and laughed. He said, I want to see footage of that audition. Do you have it? And I always tell people this story. Hulk Hogan and I have something in common. We both scored victories over Zeus. but
yours was less painful. Yours was less painful.
But I want to stay humble, though, because I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, stealing Barry Horowitz's gimmick and breaking my back in the process. So anyways, I'm thankful for the FMW gig. But there were actually two phases of FMW under Tokyo Pop. The first series of videos that we did, which were sold in video stores and that were top sellers on Billboard's sports video chart, the first videos were scripted by Hollywood script writers, which I didn't know they were going to do when I auditioned. I thought I was just going to do straight play-by-play. And this was something pretty new at the time, because nowadays, in the year 2025, everybody, including the general public, knows that World Wrestling Entertainment, they have TV script writers from sitcoms and that kind of thing. It's a given that's known nowadays. But back then, it was kind of a new thing. And my first color commentator for FMW was Eric Geller, a nice guy. I liked him personally, but he was primarily a stand-up comic, and his wrestling knowledge was kind of limited. The only wrestling Eric really knew was NWA St. Louis wrestling, and that was it. He didn't really keep in touch with today's wrestling at all. And the first batch of FMW videos, I haven't even watched them because I didn't like reading off of scripts word per word, telling ridiculous stories about these FMW wrestlers like Horace Boulder. He was called CPA and he was a professional accountant. I mean, just weird stuff like that. And also just weird, lame jokes. And after the horrible reaction from diehard wrestling fans, they switched to a straight play-by-play format, and they replaced Eric Geller with Dan the Mouth Lavransky from Live Audio Wrestling, who really knew his wrestling. You know, he grew up as diehard wrestling fans just like we did, and he knew his wrestling, so he was a good fit, and we just did straight play-by-play, and it was a much improved product. I'm very proud of the unscripted videos I did with Dan the Mouth Lavransky for FMW. And also, I should mention this. Again, I auditioned for both of the wrestling announcing gigs I did because a long time ago on some obscure website, I don't even know if it's still around, but somebody on a message board under a fake name wrote, I think John Watanabe had something to do with bringing these Japanese tapes over to the U.S. and thus insinuating that's how I got the job, which is not true at all. I mean, it goes with the old saying, gee, if it's on the internet, it must be true. No, it wasn't. So I just like clear that up. And also, this is another thing. Back then, when we did the scripted word for word FMW wrestling videos, the wrestling media, so to speak, was very naive. They thought that Eric Geller and I were making all this stuff up off the top of our heads. The only one who was in on it, who knew that they were scripted, was Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer newsletter. He knew that they were scripted. He was the only one who reported that. And I know that Dave has, you know, he's a controversial figure today. He has his supporters and, you know, other people who don't support him. But he got it back in the day. He knew that those FMW wrestling videos at first were scripted, but then he reported that the new ones with me and Dan the Mouth Lavransky, they're not scripted, straight play-by-play, and those are the ones that Dan
did color, I would assume. You did play-by-play. You did the play-by-play.
Oh, yes, I did the play-by-play, right? Move for move.
Right, and then Dan did color commentary,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and then I had the two different color commentators, Eric Geller first, and then Dan the Mouth Lavransky from Live Audio Wrestling.
With Dan, it was unscripted. With Dan, it was unscripted.
That is correct, yes. With Dan,
because you cannot. I've done announcing as well. You know, when I was with CCW, my friend JJ Purdom, he did the play-by-play. I did the color, and none of it was scripted, and it came off tremendously. Because if it isn't scripted, then it can have a genuineness and a spontaneity that the listeners find, you know, engaging, as opposed to something that's just totally stilted and pre-written and doesn't fit the mood all the time of what you see in the ring. Because yes, wrestling is scripted, but there's a lot of things that go off script, and guys will change their move set or they'll adjust things. Often the better wrestlers will adjust things to deal with the audience and to, uh, uh, compensate maybe for a cold crowd or a hot crowd, and work a hot crowd in a different way than they work a crowd that's really cold. And you as an announcer have to be able to react to that. And if what you have is scripted, it's never going to work. So go ahead. Yes.
Yes. And related to that, another thing that works for me, and wrestlers should have this ability too. I was trained in improvisation, where you do things beat by beat, in the moment, beat by beat, playing, where you react to what the other guy did, going back and forth with reactions. And I was trained in improvisation by the late, great Avery Schreiber, from the old Burns and Schreiber comedy team from the Doritos commercials. And also I was trained at the Improv Underground in Santa
With the
Monica
mustache, Avery with the mustache. Avery
yes,
with the
yes, yes, with the big mustache.
you
Yeah,
look like Gene Shalit's cousin. Yes.
exactly. Yes, yes. You know how old we are when we get these references. Yeah. And yeah, I would.
Sadly, I made an Avery Schreiber joke like about 2 weeks ago. So it does tell you where my sense of humor is these days.
My sense of humor too. Great. Yeah, I would. I studied improvisation at Avery Shriver's house in North Hollywood on Ranchito Avenue in North Hollywood. A very nice man. And one good thing that he did, along with studying improv with Avery Schreiber, he studied improvisation under Viola Spolin, who is like the Moses of improv. She started improvisation as basically as warm-up games for a play before rehearsing the play, but then it turned out that the warm-up games in improv were more entertaining than the actual play they were rehearsing. So then that's when improv turned to an art form in itself. And Avery Schreiber studied under Viola Spolin, and Avery at his house in North Hollywood for his improv classes, he did something that Viola Spolin always did, feed her students. So at every class of his at his house in North Hollywood, he would feed us food where he prepared most of the food and we brought snacks as well. So that was a very nice thing that he did. Very nice man, and of course, a very funny guy as well. And another thing along with improv is, of course, knowing your wrestling, knowing wrestling history. I backtracking to Gary Juster when I did ring announcing for him for the National Wrestling Alliance. When I told Gary Juster when he first asked me if I wanted to do ring announcing, I told him, Gary, some of these local guys doing your local ring announcing, they're not cutting it. They don't know who these people are. They mispronounce the wrestlers' names. And Gary Juster actually said, I know, I know. And Gary Juster knew that I knew my wrestling. And one thing Gary Juster told me, if for whatever reason a wrestler can't make it out to his match, which would happen, and if a new wrestler takes his place, I would see that. I would notice that. So, that's something that Gary Juster had confidence in me, when it came to knowing wrestling and knowing who these wrestlers are. So anyway, the FMW wrestling distributed by Tokyo Pop. They were bestsellers on Billboard Sports Video Chart. And also, they were shown for a decade, even after FMW ceased production. They were still shown in reruns on the Fight Network throughout Canada and the United Kingdom on a TV channel in those countries. And to this day on LinkedIn and other places, I've discovered that I still have a following by people in Canada and the United Kingdom who remember me most as FMW's announcer. One example, the new editor-in-chief for the Wrestling Estate, Stephen R. Jackson, he told me that he used to watch me on TV in England as the presenter for FMW Wrestling on the Wrestling Channel in the United Kingdom. So I'm very thankful for that. I was able to reach people in different countries through FMW Wrestling. And also, I was the on-camera host and play-by-play announcer for the Urban Wrestling Alliance, the UW.
And yes, that's what I wanted to talk about next, because I mean, that's where you and I have our greatest connection.
Yes, exactly. And I'm thankful you want to talk about it, because even though most people who know me for Tokyo Pop's FMW wrestling in different countries in the U.S., Canada, and the United Kingdom, and other places as well, I think I enjoyed the Urban Wrestling Alliance. I enjoyed it too. I think it's an equal part of my career in wrestling. And this UWA, the Urban Wrestling Alliance, it's not to be confused with a group that came later on called the Urban Wrestling Federation, which came after us, which shows that we influenced them. And it had the same kind of hip hop meets wrestling kind of theme. And the Urban Wrestling Federation, it featured guys like Eddie Kingston and Homicide and other independent wrestlers who came later on. But we were the first. We were the originators where the hip hop nation meets on the mat domination. And again, I auditioned for the UWA. I got that through my then theatrical talent agent. So I went to the audition somewhere in Los Angeles. And immediately they wanted to hire me as the play-by-play guy because I could tell that some of the other people who auditioned, they were actors. They didn't really know wrestling, but they could tell that I knew the wrestling. So they hired me as the play-by-play announcer. And by the way, there were two main guys at all of the auditions for the Urban Wrestling Alliance. There was line producer Tom Wang, who really good guy. He communicated with my talent agent most of the time, and also executive producer Vic Bullock. And Vic Bullock was the executive producer for other TV projects, including the TV reality show Judge Mathis. So these guys, they had good entertainment backgrounds, and I got the part. And then after I got the part for the play-by-play guy, they had me audition with different guys for the color position. And so I did that, and they wound up picking this guy named Rough Rider Cross, who was a rapper from Rough Riders Entertainment. And Michael Modis, who was our trainer, by the way, he even told me that, my work is really good. And when it came to my color commentator Cross, Michael Modis said he was pretty good, even though his wrestling knowledge is zero. But Cross was brought in for a different reason. Again, we were hip hop and wrestling, and Cross represented the hip hop people.
Yeah, I really wanted to get on the Urban Wrestling Alliance, but they never had space for me. But I did try out. I mean, I sent a tape down to from APW down to the Urban Wrestling Alliance to see if I could be on the show, but I never made it. So but all my other friends did, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. I mean, I could have started this hour and I could have spent the entire hour, because I have before, on Mark Smith. And I saw that you really had a tribute thing on your blog about Mark Smith. And if there's somebody that meant something to me in my wrestling career, it was my relationship with Mark Smith. He meant everything to me. He was one of my best friends in the business. And, when we worked together at APW, and I put him under a mask as Super Destroyer 2000, the two of us had just a run together that was really phenomenal. I mean, it really transformed him from being a really modest guy, a really meek and shy guy, to really unlocking his personality. Under the mask, he was able to do things that he was too afraid to do when he didn't have a mask on, and people knew it was him. People don't realize. People just think like masks are this thing that just you take on, you take off. They don't mean anything to the wrestlers that wear them. They're like makeup or something like that. And it's a lot more than that. The mask provides something to guys if they use it the right way. I mean, some guys will just throw on a mask for a one-time gimmick and that's it, right? But the ones that take it seriously, like ones like the Spoiler, like the Assassin, like Mr. Wrestling, 1 and 2. Mil Mascaras too, even though he's a lucha guy. I mean, the mask meant so much to him. It changes their personality, allows them to do things they couldn't do without the mask. It's an empowering thing. And Mark took that to him. It changed who he was as a wrestler. And I think it helped elevate him to when he finally came down to Urban Pro and did well there, and then Ring of Honor, and then Puerto Rico and Japan. What are some of your thoughts about working with Mark Smith?
Oh, Mark Bison Smith, of course, as you know, he was this big, muscular guy, who looked intimidating on the outside, but deep down inside, he was a big, soft teddy bear. I mean, such a sweet guy, kind of shy, like you said. And by the way, it was neat seeing him in APW as Super Destroyer 2000, because when I grew up as a kid, I grew up watching the Super Destroyer, played by Don Jardine, wearing a mask. And then after that, it was Super Destroyer Mark II, played by the future Sergeant Slaughter. And both of these guys were managed by Lord Alfred Hayes in Vern Gagne's AWA. And back then, the mask meant something. And, these guys came across as intimidating, as Mark did when he wore a mask as Super Destroyer 2000. And of course, back in those days, they had a good mouthpiece in Lord Alfred Hayes. And you were a good mouthpiece for Mark II when he was Super Destroyer 2000.
It was great. It was a great union between the two of us. I mean, I always loved that the concept of the yappy manager combined with the big, strong, silent bodyguard. That's like one of the great tropes of wrestling is having the guy that writes all the checks, and then the big guy cashes them. That everyone hated me so much because I was always, yapping and yapping, but I would then send Mark in to do all the enforcement, and he'd have to pay all my bills, even though I was the one writing the check. So.
And that's what the manager was there for, along with providing different finishes for matches like outside interference, but also to be a mouthpiece, the spokesperson for either a wrestler who simply cannot talk, or for like a foreign menace who supposedly spoke a foreign language, who would speak the language for him, or for a menacing hitman, or, kind of like Super Destroyer 2000 that you managed. And Bison Smith, he was a good talent. And for the Urban Wrestling Alliance, he was the tag team partner, a part of a tag team called Blitz. And Mark Bison Smith, for the Urban Wrestling Alliance, he formed a team with a guy called Luminous. He was also known as Luminous Warrior in Independence. Also, Luminous Warrior, real name Jimmy Diaski, he actually had experience with some of the old territories like the USWA in Tennessee, and also for the Global Wrestling Federation in Dallas that was seen on ESPN. So Luminous was an asset. Not only did he tag team with Bison on UWA TV, but also Luminous worked behind the scenes at our training center, which was like this in this warehouse in El Segundo, California, where our UWA guys train and practice matches. And Michael Modest was our main trainer, but also Luminous, he kind of assisted with the training because he had knowledge, experience in some of these territories, and he passed that knowledge along to the younger guys, to really build up the younger guys. And most of the guys for the UWA, they were younger talents, still pretty young in their careers, but we also had a few veterans who were slightly older, with slightly more experience to help out the younger guys and to put over the younger guys on TV who were given the bigger pushes. A couple of these older guys were Perry Action Jackson, who wrestled for the Von Erichs World Class Championship Wrestling back in the day. Also, he wrestled for Bill Watts and for the Global Wrestling Federation. And Action Jackson, I could tell, he was a solid veteran. He really helped some of the younger guys out on TV. And also, as a side note, Action Jackson told me that Vince McMahon wanted him and Iceman Parsons to go to the World Wrestling Federation, but Iceman got into some kind of trouble, so that messed things up for them. But anyway, I remember one time Action Jackson during a practice match, he actually bladed himself. He had blood pouring from his forehead. Executive producer Vic Bullock, I saw him shake his head. He did not like that. So some of these TV people, they don't like the sight of blood for their TV shows, but that's the difference between old school wrestlers and some of these more modern TV executives. They have little differences there. And another veteran who helped out with the younger guys is a guy who you would know, I believe, the Bomber Robert Thompson.
Yeah, took a frog splash from him one time.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
That was the one time that I actually wrestled and got in the ring as a combatant. And if you saw the finish, it's on YouTube. You'd understand why I didn't get in the ring after. I had one other match where I was part of a street fight where I just cowered in the corner and tried to run away with Modest and Morgan against Big Ugly J.D. Bishop and Vinny Massaro, and I just ran to the corner and just cowered and hid. And I really was scared for my life because one of those kind of street fight matches, they don't do any scripting on that. They just know the finish, and the rest of it is just all of them just figuring out what they're going to do when they feel like it. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, they're going to use you as a prop to hit somebody else with. So I was just like, just please don't hurt me, just cowering in the corner the whole time. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. So yeah, Robert Thompson was great. I know you worked extensively with Tony Jones, our late friend Tony Jones. It's I miss him a whole lot. It's been just about a year since he died, which is still hard to believe. I don't know. What was your experience working with Tony Jones?
Yeah, Tony Jones, he was a very nice, kind of quiet guy, not pretentious in any way. And of course, he was a good talent, good amateur background. And he, throughout our UWA Urban Wrestling Alliance run, he wrestled as HTK. And at first, he was a babyface called Hard to Kill, a no-nonsense babyface who could wrestle. But then some people behind the scenes, they had no doubts about Tony's wrestling ability, no doubt, but they kind of questioned his charisma or on-camera persona, or did he even have an on-camera persona? So then they turned him heel, and then Tony Jones became a heel or bad guy called Honor, Truth, and Knowledge, which was kind of like a pompous Mr. Backlund or Kurt Angle kind of heel, where he thought he was better than everyone. And yeah, Tony Jones, I thought he did consistently good work. In fact, one time for UWA TV, Tony wrestled a match against the Bomber Robert Thompson. And like you said, those guys wrestled each other many times. So no wonder why they had a good match. It was a good competitive match, back and forth, back and forth. And in the end, the older Thompson put over the younger Tony Jones, who was getting a good push in the UWA. And of course, for the UWA, we had lots of independent young wrestlers, and it seems like there were contingents of independent wrestlers representing different independent groups from around the country. For example, we had some guys from Maryland Championship Wrestling. From Maryland Championship Wrestling, we had Sideswipe and Two Dope, the Street Soldiers, and we had Marcus Ham and Orlando Jordan, the Black Legion. This was before Orlando Jordan became JBL's chief of staff on SmackDown. And also we had some guys from Georgia, from Dusty Rhodes Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling. We had Sonny Siaki, and we also had Jorge Estrada. And then both of those guys wound up being the Flying Elvises on Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. And yeah, Jorge told me that Dusty taught him everything, especially when it came to ring psychology, I think interviews as well. And also Jorge Estrada, he did his own move called the 2000 version of the flip flop fly as a tribute to his mentor Dusty Rhodes. So that was fun. And also we had, of course, lots of guys from APW, from your old group in Northern California. We had the shooter Tony Jones, Bison Smith, your good friend. Also we had, who else? We had, Donovan Morgan. We had Brent Albright. Actually, Brent Albright told me he first started in Oklahoma pro wrestling, and then Brent Albright went to APW. And at the time, before he came to the UWA, Brent Albright's regular job was carrying water jugs from place to place, and then he came over to UWA. Yeah. So.
And then wasn't Joe Applebaumer in
what?
Urban? It was Joe Applebaumer, Pogo Joe Applebaumer. I thought he may have been in Urban.
I don't recall
trying to remember
that name. I don't recall, but let me see. Other APW guys, we also had James Watkins Mayock.
Oh yeah, Mayock. Yes, the magician. He was the Mayock the magician up at APW. I don't know what his gimmick was down.
Yeah, in APW, I know that he was Mayock the magician doing a magician gimmick for you guys in APW, but when James Watkins came over to the UWA, he was just plain Mayock, and he was, obviously he was a well-trained wrestler, but he was mainly brought in to put over some other guys who were given a push, mainly this big guy named Surge. And I liked Surge personally. He was actually an actor. His real name is Sergio Risti, and good-natured guy. I liked him, but Surge had zero wrestling experience. And they really, really had to help Surge out when it came to the basics of wrestling. I remember one training session for a match between Mayock and Surge that was later shot for television. where I called the action at the Grand Olympic Auditorium anyway. But Michael Modest was our trainer, and he kept telling Serge, and he pointed, to Mayock, follow his lead, follow his lead. Mayock was carrying Serge to make Serge like this big unstoppable monster, and Michael Modest really had to teach him the psychology, behind the moves too. Where there's this one sequence where Serge pushed Mayock into the corner, and Mayock sold like crazy for Serge. And then Serge just stood there and not really knowing what to do. And then Michael Myers said, do a flex, like Lex Luger would do. Do a flex like this to intimidate. So then Serge looked out into the crowd or whatever and did this. And Michael Myers said, no, do it to Mayock in the corner to intimidate Mayock. He really had to teach him move by move, not only the moves themselves, but why are you
Sometimes
doing
it's
that?
not as instinctive. People think it's so easy because they see it on TV. And then, when they get in the ring, they realize, A, that everything moves 100 times as fast as it did on television. And B, you forget everything that you were trying to do. Like you remember one move and then the rest of it becomes scrambled. Like the first time you're in the ring. It's all the lights and the crowd and how big everything is. It really can psych people out.
Yeah, and we wound up doing that match for TV, Mayock versus Serge. It wound up being a good passable match. It accomplished what it needed to do to make Serge look like a monster, and Mayock carried the whole thing and, sold and bumped big time for Serge. And related to that match, it brings back a memory of Michael Modest. First of all, Michael Modest was our head trainer, training these UWA guys and helping to put together the matches as well. Michael Modest was also originally supposed to be a wrestler because we had scripts back in those days, by the way, and they described Michael Modest as this guy who looked like Popeye, but Michael Modest wound up not doing the wrestler part. He just stayed behind the scenes as the trainer. And Michael Modest always gave me good feedback, honest feedback too, because he's a wrestling guy.
Yeah, he's one of the most honest people on the face of the earth.
Yeah, he really is. He really is. So he always told me I was doing a good job, but here and there he would tell me I could do maybe a little less of this, a little more of this, that kind of thing. And and in this TV match, Serge versus Mayock, Serge basically squashed Mayock. And, I remember I said on camera, boy, get out the ladle and scoop Mayock off the mat. He's done. And then Michael Modest told me afterwards, you could have built up Mayock a little bit more, saying he gave up, put up a fight, because I think Michael Modest started out as a jobber or enhancement talent early in his career. I think, and he continued to do that kind of work as well. And I think he has a real heart for job guys or enhancement talent guys who make the bigger guys, look good. So, that's something he wanted more out of me. But Michael Braverman disagreed. Michael Braverman told me, I told it like it was. He got his butt kicked, okay? And by the way, Michael Braverman worked closely with me. Michael Braverman is the business partner of Barry Bloom. And Barry Bloom and Michael Braverman, going back to the 80s, starting with Jesse Ventura, they've been representing wrestling talent. And at the time, Michael Braverman, he represented Chris Jericho, Kevin Nash, Goldberg, Ric Flair at that time. And Michael Braverman was brought on to coach me and my color commentator when it came to the announcing part, where we would go into, private areas, either at Rich Mill Productions in Los Angeles, which was one of the production companies that was a part of the UWA project, or there at the training center in El Segundo, California, where, we would, watch these wrestlers, and I would call the action, and Braverman would give me pointers here and there. And, Braverman, he was a good guy. He knew wrestling, obviously, since he represented wrestling talent. But this is a funny thing. You, of course, know what the Wrestling Observer newsletter is back in those days. Oh, it's inside information that the public is not supposed to know.
Dirt sheets.
Yeah, dirt sheet, as they call it. Spilling the dirt on what's going on behind the scenes in wrestling. Well, again, Michael Braverman and we got along great, but a couple of times he seriously looked at me and said, if I ever find out that my name is in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, I'm coming after you because you're the only one around here who knows it. But first of all, that's not true. I knew at least a couple of other guys knew about it too.
Well, it
In
was the
fact,
day
one
before the internet, so yes, there were only so many sources. I wanted to find out from your opinion, because UWA Urban Pro had so many great things going for it. Why didn't it succeed? Why was it not more of a success?
it's too bad that it wasn't more successful. And at one time, when it first kicked off in 20 major markets, we were seen on 20 major markets on UPN TV stations in places where urban hip hop music is popular, like Dallas, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Houston, Miami, Florida, major markets that were urban in nature where hip hop music was popular. And on every UWA show, along with the wrestling, we also featured a music video at the end, like by Jay-Z or Lil Romeo, to add to the hip hop flavor. But at first, we were doing well for what it was on 20 major market stations. I remember one time backstage at a UWA taping, our executive producer, Vic Bullock, he told some of us that our UWA TV show, in at least certain markets, apparently beat out the WWF syndicated show Jacked. So that was good news at the time. And eventually, we're supposed to be on a major cable network. We're supposed to apparently be on BET, Black Entertainment Television. In fact, that was reported in some publications before it was supposed to happen, but it wound up not happening. And there was
I
no
remember
official
talking to
announcement.
Tony Jones about that. I remember Tony Jones and I had a conversation about that, but continue.
Yeah, and there was no official announcement that the UWA was closing or ending or anything. It just quietly disappeared. In fact, one time in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, it was printed back in those days. I used to get it, by the way, and I called. And we stopped TV tapings too. And we had TV tapings at different places, including the Barker Hangar in Santa Monica, California, and the Grand Olympic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles, which I'm thankful I did play-by-play at, because I used to watch shows from that arena back in the day, and I wound up doing play-by-play at the Olympic Auditorium. But anyways, I called up our executive producer for the UWA, Vic Bullock, and I said, here in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, it says that we're supposed to have an upcoming TV taping at the Grand Olympic Auditorium on this certain date. And then Vic told me, aha, somebody is leaking information. And Vic assured me, no, it's not happening. But when we do have our next taping, I'll definitely tell you. I'm not going to leave you out. But I wound up getting no information about any more tapings. And I don't know all the exact details, but the bottom line is the bottom line. To keep a TV wrestling show going, you need money. You need lots and lots of money. And there were supposedly some big money backers with the UWA. In fact, I remember at one training session in El Segundo, there was a lot of promise. Michael Modest told us that Paul E. Heyman doesn't have the money for his ECW. ECW was still running at the time. Paul E. doesn't have the money, but he said that the UWA does have money backing it with all these money backers. But I don't know if there was a disagreement when it came to how much money people would give or who would put up what money or what. I don't know. But the bottom line is we just didn't have the money anymore. And we wound up not being on BET, and we just stopped production of the TV shows. So it's too bad, because it was very innovative, and it provided an alternative to the other product that was going on, which still exists. So I gotta say that if FMW and the UWA still existed, I'd still be doing play-by-play for both of them. Not only because I love wrestling and I like doing announcing, but I really liked the specific team members on both teams. I had a good camaraderie with the people I worked with. So it's too bad that they both stopped, and they both stopped basically to not having money anymore.
Is there any way to watch any of their old videos online at all?
On YouTube, there are some individual matches of the UWA, the Urban Wrestling Alliance, that came off of UPN TV feeds, because I saw a match that said UPN Houston on one, and some came from other channels, so they came right off of TV, off of people's VCRs, I guess. So there are individual matches out there on YouTube. So yeah, so
But not
may
like a
those memories live
compendium.
on.
There's no one single source of where you can see Urban or FMW matches.
No, because, well, I don't know who would have the original tapes, but I could tell you two production companies who may still have them. Again, Rich Mel Productions in Los Angeles was one of the production companies that was involved with UWA. Maybe they still have some originals. Also, I did lots of post-production as an announcer where I did lots of looping or new voice work, to match the editing they did for the video part. So I did post-production with Greg Hewson, a really good post-production guy. Greg Hewson used to run a company called Secret Headquarters, and he may have tapes too. I don't know, but there's no one source out there to the public that has UWA, except on YouTube. There are some memories with people, recording off of VCRs and putting them on YouTube.
Thank God for that. Now, while we have a few minutes left, tell me about what you're up to now. What are your current projects?
Well, glad you asked. I have a big celebrity appearance coming up on Saturday, May 24th. I have been chosen to be one of the celebrities at this year's Garden Grove Strawberry Festival happening during Memorial Day weekend. And I'm going to be one of the celebrities involved on Saturday, May 24th. And with that, I'd like to thank Andrea Perez and Kelly Ellis and the rest from the Garden Grove Association, Garden Grove Strawberry Festival Association, for inviting me to be one of the celebrities for this year's festivities. First, I'm going to be at the celebrity breakfast, which starts at 8:15 a.m. on Saturday, May 24th in the Garden Grove Community Center. And then I'm going to be one of the celebrities in the Strawberry Festival Parade, where my beautiful wife April and I will be riding in the parade. And the parade's Grand Marshal is Kate Linder, one of the stars of the TV soap opera, The Young and the Restless. So my beautiful wife April and I, we're going to be waving to all these people lined up throughout Garden Grove. And then shortly after,
Do you ever
the
think
parade,
that you would ever like be one day featured in a parade? Do you ever
no,
think that
thank
would happen to
God.
you?
I never thought I would be in a parade like that, especially as one of the special guest celebrities involved. That is such an honor. I thank God for it. And again, I thank the Garden Grove Strawberry Festival Association. And then after the parade is over, maybe around 1 p.m., maybe 12:30 p.m., I'm going to be one of the celebrities. I'm going to be one of the celebrities signing autographs at the celebrity autograph table, which will be just outside the Garden Grove Courtyard Center in Garden Grove. So I hope to meet a lot of people who have followed my wrestling career and who still listen to me on the radio. And by the way, for the last 14 years, I've been a full-time on-air radio personality at KWVE, K-Wave Christian Radio, FM 107.9 FM, and AM 1110 Los Angeles, which is owned by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, which was founded by the late great pastor Chuck Smith, who was portrayed by Kelsey Grammer in the movie Jesus Revolution. And I'm honored to be a part of K-Wave. And K-Wave this year is celebrating its 40th year on the air. And I'm thankful to be a part of a station that's been on the air so long, spreading the good news, spreading the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And it really gives you an eternal perspective of what's going on in this world around us. So I'm thankful I've been working at K-Wave during the last 14 years of K-Wave's 40 years. So that's what I've been doing lately, and I thank God for it all.
And if our fans wanted to contact you, what would be your best way, or how you're connected with social media?
Sure. Okay, well, first of all, I am connected on LinkedIn, and some people who have followed my wrestling career have connected with me on LinkedIn. Also, I have my own blog site on Blogger. I have my own blog site called Straight Up John Watanabe, where I post lots of memories of my pro wrestling career, including, like you said, I made special posts about Tony Jones and Bison Smith, memories of working with them. So that's a way you can stay connected to me as well.
Well, that's really great. It's been wonderful having you here as a guest, and time is short though, and we're right at the end of the hour. So really appreciate having you here. And when you have any upcoming projects, or you want to reminisce again about some of the guys we worked with, love to have you back on. So otherwise, wish you and your wife the best at that upcoming show and being part of the parade. And look forward to having you again sometime soon.
Thank you, buddy. God bless.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all next week.